Hi, Beth. It's good to spend some time with you. Beth Nimmo, you are the mother of Rachel Joy Scott, the young gal who was massacred at Columbine High School some 20 years ago. And I just wanted to talk to you and spend some time because God has given you a passion and a purpose through pain.
Thank you, Linda. I've grown a lot. Didn't start there, but you know, God's so good. Healing is a process, and it's not always quick. It's certainly not easy, but God is always faithful to bring it full circle and do a complete work.
I know you've recently talked to some women on a retreat, and you've also spent time with some young people in youth groups, and God is using you all over the place to just share not only Rachel's legacy, but what we as moms need to be doing to make an impact for our world in protecting our kids and preparing them for life.
I think one of the biggest life lessons I've learned from this is our kids are in a war. They're on a battlefield every day. They leave your home. They're walking into a war zone. And sometimes they're not equipped. Sometimes they're blindsided by what they're going to face. And our society has really diminished authority in so many areas.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, now our children are compromised about who to believe, who has the right to say what. You know, and a lot of times our parents have been dumbed down by TV and movies or sitcoms or whatever. And so kids don't put the respect and they don't have the same understanding about who is in charge or who the authority is and why it's important to have that covering in your life. Mm-hmm. And so one of the greatest lessons I've learned from Columbine is as a parent, we have to be the person where the buck stops when it comes to how to guide our children and how to prepare them for life.
And you had a young daughter who really loved Jesus and wanted to follow him.
Yes.
And wrote in her diary daily in her journals. And you didn't even find some things until after the massacre had happened and you were just going through her things. Mm-hmm. And you saw what was God doing in her life and what he was preparing her for.
It was remarkable, Linda. I wasn't aware of how God was going to use Rachel, of course, and I wasn't aware of how he was preparing her for that actual event at Columbine High School. And so when we started finding the writings and started seeing the drawings, God's hand was just all over it. And even though I'm firmly convinced there's only one who comes to kill, steal, and destroy, and that's the enemy of our soul, anything the enemy doesn't take God by surprise. And so he prepares us to go through whatever fire, whatever loss, whatever pain, whatever hurtful situation. He prepares us for that. And so he prepared Rachel. She had a sense that she wouldn't live to be very old. And he was just preparing her for that final day when he would see her face to face. And when the shooter approached her for the final shot, he had a gun to her temple. And he asked her, he said, "Do you still believe in God?" And when Rachel answered, "You know that I do," he said, "Go be with her." At that moment, I'm firmly convinced she went from the face of evil into the presence of the Lord. And she did exactly what her shooter said, only the outcome for Rachel was wonderful. You know.
Absolutely. As a mom, and as that devastating heartache, and just hard for any of us to put in words, and you had to walk through that. You had to live through that. How did you live each day after that time when you knew your daughter was taken to heaven? Mm-hmm. She was your child. Pain in your heart. You had a son that was also there, yes, but he was spared as he watched both his friends die on each side of him.
Right.
And he played dead.
Mm-hmm.
how does a mom, how does God help us?
Well, the Lord, as a teenager, I had lost 2 siblings through 2 different situations of drowning, 2 different incidents. And I watched my mom and dad be able to raise their hands and just thank the Lord, even though they had just lost a son and a daughter. And so I had a godly example. But when Rachel died, Craig was just a shell of a person for about 2 years. He was emotionally dead inside, except for anger. He had anger. That's the only emotion he could really connect to or relate to. And everything else about him was, you could see it. His eyes were glazed. He was in a fog. He would make a list of things that to do for the day, and his list would be get up, eat, get dressed. I mean, he was barely functioning, and he was having to remind himself to even do those things. And so my first concern was for my children, mainly for my son, Craig, and then I had a younger son, Michael, that were still in my home. And so I put my own feelings, my own grief process, of course I grieved, but to really deal with what was going on the inside of me, I put that aside, and I would say, I'll do better when my kids do better. And my purpose and intent during that season was to see my son restored to a normal teenage boy. And for 2 years, Craig was in this fog. And after 2 years, I saw him turn a corner. All of a sudden, you saw him responding more as a normal 16-year-old or 17 by that point, you know. And I thought, okay, God's doing healing. Well, about 5 years out of Rachel's death, I hit the wall, and I had to start dealing with my own loss.
Up to that time, you were being a mom.
I was.
You were taking care of everyone.
I was.
And then the mama bear heart had to go through its own grieving time.
Yeah. As a teenager, losing my brother and sister, I watched my mom and dad be comforted and things. But as children, we kind of had to figure out on our own how to get through the process of losing a sibling. And so that was very predominant in my mind and my thinking. And it became my obsession, you might say, because I remember those feeling how do I cope with losing Becky? How do I cope with losing Mike? And then I ended up losing my brother Steve. So my dad had buried 3 children plus 2 grandchildren. And I watched the godly example of them being able to raise their hands and just thank the Lord. You know, I believe with all my heart God doesn't plan those things, but He knows when that's going to happen, and He uses them for His purposes. And I watched my mom and dad still serve the Lord, still love the Lord. They didn't get bitter, they didn't get angry, you know, they didn't react to their loss.
So we saw God's grace really kicking in and supernaturally helping people through that grieving, desperate time.
Yes.
And as then God chose the time for you to go through your grief and your pain. And out of that pain, there began to swell up a passion.
Yes.
With a purpose.
Yes.
To fulfill a destiny. And here you're a meek-spoken woman. You're bold in your own way. You are powerful. That pain, bringing you to that passion for purpose and destiny. What has that been like for you?
Well, I had a resolve that I would become Rachel's voice. Okay?
Yes.
And I mean, if you takes out my daughter, that doesn't mean the message doesn't go forward. It doesn't move forward. It only means that other people are picking up that torch. In fact, that was a theme at Rachel's funeral service, was who will pick up the torch. And I didn't really sit there and say, yes, me, you know, I'll do that. But over a period of time, through the writings and the drawings that she left, I began to see God's hand and purpose in allowing her to be in that mix of Columbine shooting. And I thought, I'm just not going to let the enemy have the upper hand here. And I can't say it the way Rachel did. I use her own words to convey her message. But then I've got the bend of being a mother. And so I can talk to moms. And I can say, I've learned a lot of things. In hindsight, you have regret, you have victories. You know, I saw what I did well and what I didn't do well. And God was merciful in both situations.
It is so nice just to be able to sit down and talk with you and have a conversation and know your heart and how God has sustained you and how God is giving you this purpose and this destiny to be Rachel's voice, to make an impact in this world. And I know your son is doing the same thing in youth and ministries and going and making an impact in teens' lives, especially during this culture, the way it is. How did you find yourself, kind of our last question, how did you find yourself enabling God to enable you to forgive?
Well, first of all, forgiveness isn't one-time thing. I forgive the shooters. I forgive. It was a process. But because of my biblical teaching and my heritage, I knew the word says you have to forgive. So, it was like, okay, Beth, you've got to get there somehow. You've got to get there. And I remember when her father and I gave our first interview to Maria Schreiber, she asked us how we felt about the shooters, and we both acknowledged that we were going to forgive them. They were forgiven. And it was like we had slapped her. I mean, we were 2 or 3 days out of the shooting, and nobody was talking that. And it wasn't so much that we were there. It was a place where we wanted to get to. But you have to build. You have to give God something to work with. So you have to build those forms and say, God, these are forms right now. They're void. They're empty in my life. But I know you'll fill them with your forgiveness. You'll fill them with your grace. And I'm going to confess that that's where I'm going and that's where I'll be. And that's the end result of what happened.
So you allowed what you already knew in your strength, even though as weak as it was right now,
Yeah.
and you couldn't even make yourself forgive. You couldn't even muster up enough energy or say, I've got to do this. It was a working of God through you, and you saying, okay, Lord. And then he was starting to begin that work, so you were able to be able to forgive what was happening.
I was in such shock and trauma to even talk about forgiveness at that point was just an obedience to the word. You don't have those feelings. You don't have those feelings. You don't have even those intentions. But the word says forgive, up to 70 times 7. And all my life I had heard about forgiveness. And all of my life I've heard about how God forgives us. And to be forgiven, you forgive, right?
Absolutely.
And so I wanted that. Even if I wasn't capable of giving it at that point, I still wanted it. And so I just started confessing something in belief that if I give that to God again and again and again, someday that's going to be real for me. That's going to be my life story. I will be able to walk in forgiveness and grace. And I said this earlier when we were talking, but I said sometimes it's easier to forgive the dead than the living. And the reason why that's the case is because living can still hurt you again and again and again. If there's somebody in your life, a person that's hurt you deeply and gravely, sometimes those things can still be triggered, and you'll feel that anger and that pain like it happened yesterday. And the thing about with the shooters of Columbine, I never had to face them. I never had to hear any justifications. I didn't have their words. They committed suicide that very day, probably within 30, 45 minutes of killing Rachel. And so it was a done deal in a way, Now, did I still feel angry about that? all day long, especially when I saw what Craig experienced and what he went through. That made me just as angry as losing Rachel. Because Craig was living, and he had to live with all the sights and sounds and smells of that day. And those are hard memories to overcome.
And yet you have seen God just really use him in his healing process, and he is the voice of Rachel in his realm of what God has called with purpose from his pain and had the passion that he has. I think of Genesis 50:20. What man has meant for evil, God has meant for good, so that many lives would be saved. How many times have we read that verse and it never had any depth or meaning to it? Now it has so much depth and breadth to it.
I think that the cost is a price that we don't want to pay. We see it with others. We like, well, look how God's used that. Look how God's used that person. How that situation has been used for God's glory. But when it comes home and you're the one that's paying that price, it's like, no, God, please don't ask me to go there. And yet we know the word is true.
We would never put our sons on the cross for anybody, would we?
No, we would not.
Our children for any way. That's right.
The protectiveness of every parent is there to protect our children. But by the same token, God didn't ask me. He just did what God does. He prepared Rachel. I think really he even prepared Craig, even though Craig didn't understand that at the time. And now Craig goes around, he speaks in high schools and events, and has a program called Value Up that is amazing. And it has saved so many kids. He had a kid ask him last week when he was in New Hampshire doing a school. He came up to him after the program and talked about how his mother had been raped and horrible personal experience that this child had experienced in his own life and own family. And this young man said, I want to make a difference. Craig wrote on his Facebook page, he said, people ask me all the time why I do this. Well, that's the reason. It's that one that catches it, that one that can turn their life around, that one that sees something better than what they've been living, and will be strong enough to do the hard work that it takes to change that.
Because a lot of them are hurting, they're fearful, they've been damaged, they're wounded, they've had hate built up in their heart. And it's just to be able to reach those young people to make a difference. I want to give kind of the website for Craig and you, but I have one more thing I just really would like to talk to you about. Because of that forgiveness, because of the pain that you've been through, because of the pain rising up a passion for you to be Rachel's voice, to give you purpose and destiny, you now have become friends with one of the moms who was one of the shooters that day.
This mother reached out and sent the victims' families letters pouring out her heart about how sorry she was for the behavior of her son and the actions of her son. And so we were intended to meet. Media got wind of it, and I knew God did not want me to make this a media, sensational kind of interview with a shooter's mom. So we put it aside, and then when it was arranged for me to meet her very privately, I was on my way to meet her, and I was like, oh Lord, what am I supposed to say to this mother? Now, she had suffered all the shame and reproach and the hate. I had received all the love and comfort and support, but she was a mom, and she lost her son that day too.
So two moms' hearts came together over grieving of their children.
Yes. And so on the way to meet this precious mother, the Lord just gave me a real compassion for him. I was like, Father, what am I supposed to say to this woman? I didn't know if she would be hostile, she'd be angry, accusing. I didn't know. But I knew she had to be broken, right?
Yes.
And so the Lord spoke to my heart, Linda, and he said, ask her who her son was before April the 20th of 1999. And I did. We started off the conversation that way. I just told her, I said, I know nothing of your son except the events of that day. I said, will you just tell me who he was before April 20th, 1999? And tears just flowed down her. She said, nobody wants to know about the beautiful little curly-haired blonde boy that I raised, nurtured, loved, cared for his whole life. And about 2 years prior to the event of the shooting, he had taken a dark turn, and they were losing him, but they didn't know how to get him back. And she just poured out her heart.
So that brought even more healing
Yes.
for her and for you together.
Yes.
And we can't even imagine that in our humanity when we have such pain, but we can when God's love works through us to forgive and to face that reality and use it all for His good. And just so thankful that you reached out to her, or she reached you, and that you found that kindred spirit. Thank you for spending time with me. I could just sit with you and have coffee with you and learn from you and your heart and what God has done. What is your website?
It's RachelJoyScott.com. And I also have a Facebook, Rachel Joy Scott Ministries, that people can go on there and see things. And my daughter does that. I don't do that. And she's very private with it, but we share more personal things.
Okay.
And the website is available. People can reach me through the website. And my daughter, if they ever said anything on Facebook, I would hear about it as well.
And what is Craig's?
Craig's is, I'm not sure about his website, but his organization is called Value Up.
Value Up.
Value
Okay.
Up. In other words, esteem yourself a little higher than what you might think you're worth. And he really gives kids a reason to value themselves and value life and value others.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you for spending some time. And
Thank you.
we'll have to get together again and talk some
we will.
more. Okay.
Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Beth.
Of
Good to
course.
be with you.